grandee, staunch pro-European, Ken Clarke from Nottingham. Ken Clarke, welcome back to the programme. Given the limited nature of the Prime Minister's demands, do they really need to be validated by a referendum?
Well, I don't think there's any point in arguing about whether we're going to have a referendum or not anymore, because we obviously are going to have one, so we better have a sensible one, and better have one that comes to the right result in the national interest as well. So now I'm concentrating, in my case, to an organisation called British Influence, all party, lots of think tanks, all coming together in an umbrella group. We are hoping to put together a yes campaign.
Okay, let me ask you this. If we concentrate on the substance then, are you aware yet what major powers the Prime Minister is out to repatriate from Brussels?
He's not asking to repatriate any powers. He launched a great study of that. We've published an enormous volume of stuff in order to have evidence-based policy produced by the civil service, but with instructions to be objective about the present balance of powers, which past British governments have negotiated with the other Europeans, and it couldn't find any powers that were doing us harm or anywhere where we benefit by them being repatriated. I go back to what David Cameron said clearly he wanted to achieve when he first announced his desire to hold a referendum, which was in a speech he gave. It's called the Bloomberg speech, and that was mainly economic reforms, which I think we are going to get. We're going in the right direction, things like completing the single market, deregulation and so on. It's actually now already substantially the agenda of the Commission.
Right, but just to be clear, you're saying that as a result of all this process and this renegotiation, building up to a referendum, no powers will be repatriated from Brussels to London?
Well, most of the people demanding a repatriation of powers can't think of any or want to repatriate powers that would lead, for example, to an inability to tackle international crime. There was an extraordinary attempt to oppose the European arrest warrant recently. Well, international crime is better organised than international criminal justice. We actually are only able to tackle modern crime, organised crime, because of the powers that we share. We pool sovereignty and we get cooperation between the police and courts of Europe. Now, there are lots of examples like that, and nobody's cited one where they can make a case where it's in the British interest to repatriate.
So just to be clear, on farming, fishing, free trade, criminal justice, you've just mentioned, energy, free movement of peoples, immigration, employment law, everything that Brussels currently has over these areas remains with Brussels.
Because British governments for 40 years have agreed to pool sovereignty in that way, and it's very difficult to point to what advantages you think are going to come if you pull out of these arrangements. The trouble with fishing, for example, which is often cited, is unfortunately the fish don't know they're British. And our fishing vessels wish to fish in other people's waters. So the idea that we're just going to have our fish and only our ships catching our fish, and that somehow science can demonstrate that you don't have to ration the numbers we catch, you know, I think that sort of thing's died away. The key things are economic reforms, and then there are things that the Eurosceptics have brought in which can be tackled, like people coming here just for benefit, but I don't think that will be too difficult to get.
All right. Let me ask you this. Given what you seem to agree is the paucity of the Prime Minister's ambitions, would you like to see the referendum now happen sooner rather than later, 2016 rather than 2017?
Well, I don't accept poverty as ambitions. I think this is a treaty-bound organisation of nation-states from which we've gained great advantage for 40 years.
Sure, but when would you like the referendum? Sooner or later?
I'd like it earlier, because if we can actually complete this process of negotiating, the negotiations in the Bloomberg speech are all for reforms that are highly desirable, in my opinion. British people have been trying for them for years, and deregulation is an obvious example, which the present Vice President's very keen on. If we just let it drift on, then this daft debate will continue, and it really does actually cause a great deal of uncertainties. It's not causing harm at the moment, but we have a serious business for this government to transact. We still have economic progress to make. We have education reforms. We have skills training, other things to tackle. And to have the British obsessed with European issues, except when Sepp Blatter commands the newspapers, is, I think, going to be a distraction to the work that this Parliament's got to do. We face a colossal list of other more important problems. problems.
Harold Wilson, way back in the referendum in 1975, you were involved in that.
I was indeed.
Harold Wilson allowed his cabinet ministers to join both the in and out campaigns. He allowed the cabinet to split. So Mr. Benn, Mr. Foote on the one hand, Roy Hattersley, Roy Jenkins joined your side. Mr. Cameron, we understand, is going to get his ministers, they all must toe the line when the line is determined. Is that the right? Do you advise them to do that?
Well, you and I mustn't reminisce too much, Andy, but Harold Wilson was furious when he found his cabinet ministers were promptly joining organisations on both sides. That isn't what he intended. And of course, his party split, and it went on both sides. It carried on splitting, actually. It paved the way for the eventual total split when the pro-European SDP broke away under Jenkins about 4 or 5 years later.
I understand. So
now,
is Mr. Cameron
what's going
right
to happen?
or wrong?
There will be Conservatives campaigning on both sides.
But on the cabinet side?
I personally, it's up to David how he
I know
wants to
that.
run his cabinet.
I'm asking for your opinion.
I would advise him to let cabinet ministers campaign on both sides, because Ian Duncan-Smith and I are not going to be on the same side. Ian Duncan-Smith and I have both actually been committed to party unity overall. We differ on Europe. The referendum's meant to be a way of letting us resolve that in a civilised way. He will not keep I think, all the present ministerial team he's got on time. The vast majority of the ministers are pro-Europeans anyway. The party, the vast majority of MPs are pro-Europeans. I would let the Eurosceptics have a kind of free exercise in campaigning in the referendum.
Do you think, as in 75, that the in and out groups should both have the all-party umbrellas to fight the campaign? All-party umbrella organisations?
Yes. Because all parties have some divisions on this basis. The Liberals have, even they have a few Eurosceptics. There are a few Labour Eurosceptics, and there's a minority, but a block of very hardline Eurosceptics in my party. So, but for the public, do not want that to get in the way. I think we need a national decision on European membership.
All right. And the final question to you, who should lead the stay-in campaign then of an all-party umbrella group?
I think some younger politician who has wider all-party
Give me a name.
appeal. No, it's you know, all politics eventually comes back to personalities, and that's always the newsworthy bit. There isn't an obvious contender.
What about yourself? You're looking young and spry there.
Absolutely.
Done it before?
Yeah. No. I've given up running for jobs of various kinds. You know, so I personally think that it's the younger generation of rising politicians to which we should look.
Ken Clarke, thank you very much for joining us this morning.